all, and I hear it twice. So I'm going to quickly say welcome to Session 7 of the Local Foods College. And tonight, Debra Botzek-Linn will be presenting on preserving produce. So with that, I will just turn it right over to you, Debra.
You take over. Okay, thank you, Linda. I'd like to welcome you all this evening, as Linda said, to help your customer preserve your produce as part of the Local Food College series that you've been involved in. And as I was saying earlier to folks, looking at the itinerary that you've had the last 6 weeks sounds just wonderful. As you said, this is me, Deb Botzek-Linn. I am an extension educator in food safety with the University of Minnesota. I'm located at the St. Cloud Regional Office, and an enjoyable interest of mine, both professionally and personally, is home food preservation. I personally enjoy making sauerkraut, preserving tomatoes through drying and making salsa, pickling beets and green beans, making herbal vinegars. The list is getting a little long, but there's many things I enjoy. I just want to add in freezing jams, canning chicken, and making hot pepper sauce. Food preservation has been around for centuries. In the U.S., the art of food preservation peaked in the early 1900s and during World War II because of food shortages. Since 2009, we have seen a renewed interest in home food preservation of fruits and vegetables for many reasons, due to the growing interest in local grown food, an increase in vegetable gardening, a focus on health and nutrition, concerns about the economy, along with an interest in food traditions and a sense of accomplishment. This current interest in home food preservation is an opportunity for you as a grower, producer, to sell your vegetables and fruits in quantity, resulting in increased sales. I'd like to start with your role in customer food preservation. If you choose to capitalize on this marketing opportunity and encourage customer preservation of your produce, I'd like to consider what your role in customer food preservation might be. And I would like to encourage you to begin with safety first. Understand the food safety risks in home food preservation. Be knowledgeable of the whys and hows, the science and safety of preservation. Be aware of your role in responding to food preservation inquiries. Customers will ask you how to preserve your produce or how do you preserve your produce, and be able to point customers to current, reliable, research-based resources. Again, this is an opportunity for you to reach out to home preservers and potential home preservers to increase your produce sales. In this class, Help Your Customers Preserve Your Produce, we will cover food preservation resources, methods and safety in home canning, producing tomatoes and salsa products, pickling, freezing fruits and vegetables, and sharing ideas for marketing produce for home food preservation. Again, please submit your questions to the chat box. I will break following each section to respond to your questions, or however it works out as we go through this evening to make sure that we get to your questions. Always begin with, use, and share information from up-to-date, credible, research-based resources for preserving fruits, vegetables, and meat. This is very important if and when sharing preservation information with customers. There's lots of food preservation information out there, and that doesn't mean it's safe. And particularly, of course, I'm thinking online, just a wealth of information out there on food preservation. Some of that information may simply be someone being very creative. A few other things that we need to be taking a look at for resources is that Grandma's recipe may have been updated. An example of that would be jelly. Jelly, since Grandma's day, now does require a water bath process to safely seal the product. Be sure to use recipes since 1994, because since that time there has been research on times and methods resulting in some new recommendations for some of our home preserved products. We want to seek reliable resources like the University of Minnesota Food Safety website. that is on the right of our screen this evening. That is our latest updated food preservation section, and there's a wealth of information there for you. Other websites across the nation, extension websites, are a good source for you too. And I think about, like, if you're looking for salsa recipes, think about where salsa is popular. You can do, like South, I'm just going to put that right here. New Mexico, Arizona, the Southwest is looking at the University of New Mexico extension website to find a recipe like that. So Easy to Preserve is our slide up here on the left, and that's a book that is put out by the National Food Preservation Center at the University of Georgia. And it's called So Easy to Preserve. And with tonight's webinar, you do have some handouts and additional information pieces that are available to you online. One piece I did include is the order form for So Easy to Preserve. And it's just a book we recommend. It's, again, National Food Preservation Center, and it covers everything. Another thing we do have on our website at the University of Minnesota Extension Food Safety website is What's New in Home Food Preservation. This is a 13-minute online presentation giving you an update on what are some of the newest recommendations. This is also in DVD form and is available at many of the county extension offices in the state. And last but not least, we want to add AnswerLine. Many of you may be familiar with AnswerLine, and this is a cooperative effort between the University of Iowa and University of Minnesota Extension Services. It is available Monday through Friday, and you do get a live home economist. It's not an answering service. So it's a great place for you to go if you have questions on food preservation, or to send people with food preservation questions. Linda does have the handout address listed in the chat box, and I do have, I believe, 5 pieces I put there this evening for tonight's program, so when you get an opportunity to check those out. I just want to let you know that we also do have the Home Food Preservation e-newsletter. That's available online, again, at our Food Safety Food Preservation site. Also, it is available where you can subscribe. If you get your address to me, or there's a subscription piece on the web too. We do put this out 4 issues: 1 June, July, August, and September. And another thing that we always make sure to do in each issue is to put food preservation information and links to resources. The issue here, the July 2011 issue that I chose to show you this evening, does have AnswerLine, has a link to the National Center for Home Food Preservation, the U of M site, the online 13-minute program, the update. We have 18 food preservation models that are about 5-minute online presentations on a variety of food preservation topics at our website. And we are on Twitter. And with our Twitter site, during the food preservation season, we do Twitter a lot of food preservation topics, and also, again, provide links to new pieces of information. Question comes up, what about the Ball Blue Book? And you may all be familiar with that book. The Ball Blue Book is often available where preservation supplies are sold, and it's an economical, recommended, credible resource, and it usually only runs $5 to $7. This photo is not the Ball Blue Book, but it's a photo of a newer book put out by the Jardin Company. Not necessarily promoting this one, but I want to let you know that it is credible, research-based resource for you. I did give someone this gift, and I was fortunate enough someone gave me one back as a gift. And as it says, it has 400 delicious and creative recipes for today. And I could add to that, of course, safe and recommended recipes. And so it's a fun one. If you've had an opportunity to take a look at this book, I think you'll find it really fun. With this, just again to take a break as we go through each of the sections, and any comments or questions on resources. Any question that you have? Okay, I'll keep checking the chat box. Thank you, Donna. A 2005 survey conducted by the National Center for Home Food Preservation revealed that home canners are not following research-based recommendations and are getting most of their home canning instructions from family and friends. With this section, Methods and Safety in Home Canning, I would like to talk about why we do what we do to preserve safely. A woman called me at the extension office a few years ago, and she said that somebody had told her she could water bath can potatoes, and she had done so. Why is this a concern? If you want to just respond in the chat box, what's our concern with water bath processing potatoes? Well, she was concerned because she'd called, so something struck her. Okay, Linda's saying, okay, no acids, and don't kill all the bacteria. Well, exactly right. There is not enough acid. Potatoes do not have enough acid to safely water bath process, and we're going to learn more about that. So the concern is the food safety risk here, just as Donna and Linda are referring to, and I'm always concerned about somebody. Throughout my career in extension, I'm always kind of wondering who somebody is, and I think someday I'm going to meet them, because I don't think I've met them yet. But food preservation, as we know, is an art, and just from this photo here, this picture, it's lovely. We're looking at a variety of colors and shapes, and of course the light shining on it. And I think we have Howard's tomatoes there that he was referring to with too much liquid perhaps in the jar there, and the tomatoes floated. But beyond the art of food preservation, of course, is the most important piece is the science. And we're going to spend some time looking at the science. One piece of the science in the methods and safety in home food preservation includes the temperatures for food preservation. One handout that is on the site that Linda has put in the chat box is this. I have a two-piece chart here. This is the right side of the chart, and we'll see the left side in just a moment. What I want to take a look at is this is a thermometer covering, again, temperatures for food preservation. I want to go to the top of the thermometer. When we get very near the top, we see that there's 212 degrees, and we know that that's the temperature for boiling water. And as it states there, it says water boils, canning temperature for high acid fruits, tomatoes, pickles, and gelled products in a boiling water bath canner. Years ago, there were recommendations that you could water bath process green beans for 3 hours. Now, you didn't hear that from me because we do not recommend it. No, I'm just kind of teasing you, but we do not recommend that. We do not recommend that. Here we go. Recommend that method by any means. It is not safe, and like Linda says, it doesn't kill all the bacteria. My arrow's jumping. But the point with that, the 3 hours, if you process green beans for 3 hours in a boiling water bath canner, the temperature is never going to get above 212 degrees. When we go up here, we're seeing 240 degrees. And if we could read this information a little better, which I will read to you, canning temperatures for low-acid vegetables, meat, and poultry in a pressure canner. This is the temperature that a pressure canner gets at 240 degrees. I also could add another line up here, and that line would say 250 degrees if I added it in. And the wording up here would say 15 pounds pressure. So 240 to 250 degrees. And we're going to find out why that is so important to know those temperatures. The other side of the chart that I do have online for you is the pH or acid. The pH or acid level of a fruit or vegetable determines whether the product is safely home canned by processing in a boiling water canner, or if a pressure canner must be used to ensure a safe home canned product. Fruits, pickles, and tomatoes. For example, right here we have a rhubarb, we have apples, peaches, berries, dill pickles. Fruits, pickles, and tomatoes, as well as jellies and jams, are high-acid foods that are safely processed with a boiling water canner method. When we got started, or before we got started, pre the webinar, I had this slide up. What is a pathogen of concern when home canning vegetables and meat? A number of you had an opportunity to take a look at this, but we'll take a look again. Our first option, E. coli. Second, salmonella. Third, botulism, and D, our fourth, norovirus. These are the top foodborne pathogens in our country, but when it comes to home food preservation, as some of you did guess prior to the webinar, botulism is the pathogen that we are most concerned about. Clostridium botulinum is a bacteria which is found in soil, favors the low-acid environment of vegetables and meats, and germinates in the absence of air, such as in a sealed canning jar. It can produce a deadly food poisoning, which is called botulism. You cannot taste, see, or smell botulism in home canned goods. Recent outbreaks of botulism in the United States in improperly home canned green beans, beets, and carrots reinforces the need to pressure can low-acid vegetables. Visiting with a young woman who called me in the office one day, and she was so frustrated. She had canned tomatoes for the very first time, and she was so excited about that, but none of the jars had sealed. And she had called to find out why the jars had not sealed. So we went through kind of the checklist that you do to figure out why didn't a jar seal when we're canning it. Did she have new lids? Yes. Did she warm the lids in water before she put them on the jars? Yes. Did she turn the rings too tight? No, just give them a firm turn. Did she check the tops of her jars to make sure that there was no chips or nicks in the top of the jar? Did she leave enough headspace in the jar? Did she water bath process them? Yes, she did. She had water bath processed her first time of canning tomatoes in her bathtub, and none of the jars sealed. Well, I tell that to you in good humor, but also to say that sometimes our terminology that we use, for example, a boiling water bath or a hot water bath, meant something different to her than what we might be talking about. So as we're talking, again, if you're talking to customers and perhaps they're new to food preservation, we want to make sure that we're clarifying that they understand what we're talking about. Processing in a boiling water bath is necessary when you're canning high-acid foods, foods that were on the top of that pH chart, such as fruits, pickles, relishes, and jams and jellies. Water bath processing in a kettle, not a bathtub, destroys yeasts, molds, and bacteria that may cause the product to spoil, and it works to give us a good seal on the jar. One of the handouts that is available to you from tonight's webinar is titled Principles of Boiling Water Canning. Make that recommendation to you to take a look at that. It gives us more information on Clostridium botulinum, and it talks about altitude pieces of processing and also steps for successful boiling water canning, and walks us through this process step by step. Pressure canning is the only safe method of canning low-acid foods such as vegetables, meats, and poultry. Although this is not a new recommendation, it is a message that bears repeating, as the unsafe methods of water bath processing or oven canning of vegetables or meats continues with some home canners. And this is an important message to get to your customers if you are a vendor of vegetables. We want people to can green beans, carrots, beets, low-acid vegetables safely. I had written a news column on the importance of pressure canning low-acid vegetables, and a woman called and she had canned 41 pints of green beans, and she had water bath canned them. She hadn't canned for many, many years, and the last that she recalled of canning was when she was a young girl at home with her mother, and her mother had water bath canned green beans. She had not thought to even check to see if there was another way to do it. But after she read the column, she realized she had a food safety risk in hand. Her husband had just had some major heart surgery, and so it's something that, a high-risk population person in her household. And so she actually ended up throwing out the 41 pints of green beans. So we want to make sure that people aren't having that experience, that they aren't having an experience that puts them in jeopardy of a food safety illness, that being botulism, very serious illness, or that they, along with that, of course, the time and effort and the waste of product. Again, a pressure canner at 10 pounds pressure reaches 240 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's the temperature needed to destroy the spores of Clostridium botulinum, or as we know it, botulism. And again, so 240 at 10 pounds pressure, or the 250 degrees at 15 pounds pressure. If you do not have access to a pressure canner or are not comfortable operating this piece of equipment, select the home food preservation methods of freezing, which many think we're going to talk about tonight, pickling, or drying for low acid vegetables. Questions on water bath or pressure canning? Okay, I'm going to look in the chat box here. Are there still some tomatoes that are not acidic enough for a hot water bath? Yes, Donna, if you can hang on for a few more minutes. Actually, after our next section here, we're going to start on tomatoes, and we're going to talk about that. Thank you for that question. Linda, if you use a pressure canner, can I be confident that the food is safe? I'm going to say yes, thinking of a specialist that used to be at the University of Minnesota that always said there's always a risk when we process our own food. But with that being said, if we follow the directions, if we process our green beans for the recommended time at the right pressure, yes. And then the other piece of that is we should never taste food out of the jar. For example, one of the outbreaks, when I showed you the clippings from the newspapers, one was from Wisconsin a number of years back, where a woman water bathed all her vegetables. She opened a jar of canned carrots, and she simply put her finger in to taste the liquid for whatever reason, and she did get botulism from that. So we are to bring all home canned low acid foods, again, our vegetables and meat. We should not taste them from the jar. We should not serve them raw from the jar, not uncooked. We should bring them to a boil for 10 minutes. Have you used a steam canner? I have not used a steam canner. We do get questions on them. If you haven't seen them, I'll just say they look like if we took this pressure canner right here and we tipped it upside down, the lid would become our base, our jars would sit in that lid, and this larger piece, which is here our bottom, we would tip over it, kind of like an old cake saver pan years ago. But to let you know that the recommendations right now for steam canners are that we do not have any recommendations because we do not have any research on them for times and temperature. But then I will also add to that, there is research being conducted as we speak at the University of Wisconsin because steam canners, people are interested in, want to make use of them, and with that, they need information. So right now what they're saying is if you so choose to make use of a steam canner, a relatively new product on the market, follow the manufacturer's directions and use them only for high acid foods like fruits, vegetables, and pickling. I think the first part got cut off a little bit here for me. Develop your own recipes for canning. If so, what key factors need to be considered? I would discourage you from doing that. But if you so choose, again, compare them to established recipes and perhaps creating your own recipes that you're going to freeze first before you would can them, or if you want to play with recipes, only play with high acid foods. Don't play with low acid foods, and try to create your own pressure time or like 10 pounds pressure or 15 pounds pressure for 15, 20 minutes. Pickle Brothers say they have a steam canner and it is great. Yeah, I'm hearing good things about them. Okay. Can you change recipes or develop your own recipes? There we go. For canning, and if so, what key factors need to be considered? The pH, going back to that question, whether it's a high acid or a low acid food, how long is it going to take to process? Does it need to be processed in a water bath or a pressure canner? Or like I said, is it something that would freeze well? Okay, where can you pick up a cheap and accurate pH meter? Oh, check with Sherry here, our support staff, because the most economical pH meters that we are running into are about $50, and we have been going through NASCO. Is it NASCO? NASCO. If you Google them, they are a educational supply type company, equipment supply. We also say check if you have a wine or beer brewing store in your community. Sometimes they have pH meters, but pH meters can range really from $50 to $1,000. So we are finding that for what most people who are vending at the farmers market selling salsa or pickles, that a $50 pH meter has been working well for them. What are the biggest differences between raw pack and hot pack methods? Not too much, other than hot pack, you tend to get more product into the jar. For example, if we take a jar and we have cut up green beans and we put them in the jar, pour our liquid over, or if we put those same green beans in a kettle with liquid and we bring them to the boil for the recommended time and we put them in the jar, we're going to get more green beans in a jar with the hot pack method. Some people think some vegetables maintain better color, texture with a hot pack method, debatable. It's kind of your preference. What are the differences in home canned versus store canned vegetables and fruit for quality and nutrition? Both of them, anytime you can foods, you're going to lose some of the nutrient, some of the nutrition, some of the value there. I don't know if there's a big difference between home canned and store canned vegetables. One thing about store canned vegetables, they tend to have much more sodium than our home canned. And make note, in home canned vegetables that salt is optional. It's not necessary as a preservative. So if you want to control the sodium in your diet, home canning vegetables is going to beat store canned by a long shot in the sodium department. Both will lose some vitamin C because heat does destroy some of the vitamin C in our food. Vitamin A should maintain, in our orange, yellow, deep green vegetables, it should maintain. Fruit, we're gonna talk about freezing fruit. We're not really talking about canning fruit, but talk about that again. There's your sugar piece. If you're buying canned fruit in the store that is light syrup, heavy syrup, and of course with your home canned your home canned fruit, you can control that. And so quality nutrition, I like to think that the store vegetables, get right from harvested right to the processing plant, and I think they do. And same for us, we're home canning. Our home canned foods with the most quality and nutritional value are when we harvest and process, when we don't let the vegetables sit for very long before we process them. Thank you. Linda put up the website for NASCO for the pH meter information. So do take a look at that, or also do take a look, like I said, at if you do have any stores in your community or area that do supply winemakers and beer makers, and there seems to be, of course, more vineyards and winemaking in our state, and also more microbrewing and home brewing of beer. So you might come across pH meters there, and then talking about those with folks. Okay, any other questions on water bathing or pressure canning? Again, just as we wrap up this section, I just want to make sure that you're clear as if you're selling, say, a large quantity of green beans to a home food preserver, that you have the knowledge base to say, oh, they can take them home and freeze them, great. But if they're planning to home can them, that they have to pressure can those green beans versus water bath. Just looking at the overall safety issue of water bathing and pressure canning. At this time, I'd just like to take about a 5-minute break. And with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like you to take a look at these questions. I'd like you to read through these questions and write down answers to them. Read the question, visit with others. If you're at a site, I'd like you to visit with those, and if you'd like to put them in the chat box. But let's wait on putting them in the chat box, because when I come back in a few minutes, I would like to finish the questions that are up there and then ask for answers to these questions here. So we'll just take a 3 to 5 minute break for you to discuss this with your group, or for you to think about if you're online at home. Hi. I'd like to call you back if we could gather back again. Thank you for taking some time to consider these questions, perhaps to discuss them if you're at a site. I'd like to go back to the chat box at this time and answer some of the questions here. From Linda, what role does salt play in canned vegetables if not a preservative? Salt in home canned vegetables is flavoring. It really does not provide that much benefit as a preservative. There might be a tiny bit of it, but it is a flavoring. Now, when we're talking about pickling, salt and the proportions of salt to vinegar to water, etc., is very important. So salt plays a key factor in pickling, but not in canning of vegetables. Robert's asking, what is the most difficult food, I assume, to can and why? This is just my opinion. I'm sure people out there have other opinions. I'm going to start with corn. The reason I say that is corn has a very long processing time in a pressure canner because it's a very, very low acid food. And one of the things that you'll see happen with people that do can it is it'll caramelize sometimes, turn brown, just difficult. Pumpkin is another one. It was not uncommon a number of years ago for people to roast, boil, cook somehow pumpkin, get it out of the shell and everything, and pack it tightly into jars and can it. We no longer recommend that. We recommend canning it in cubes with liquid surrounding it. It produces too compressed, dense of product to be just all smashed in that jar. And I'm going to put meat on my list. Not that meat is hard to do. I personally can chicken. I know a number of folks are getting more interested in canning venison. It's just a little bit putsy, and it takes a long processing time. It's usually about 90 minutes in a pressure canner at 10, 11 pounds pressure. So it's just that it's time consuming, and you want to make sure that you've trimmed the fat off of it, because the fat can get in under the lid or so and cause your jar not to seal. Okay, Anita, for jelly, does sugar beet and sugar beet work the same, sugar cane being less GMO? Yes, any kind of white sugar. There is a difference if you're trying to make jelly with honey or corn syrup, but any of the sugar beet products versus, be it cane or beet sugar, should be fine. Okay, taking a look at the questions that we had, is there any one I'd like to make comments in the chat box in response to what produce are customers purchasing, or what methods are they using, what questions you have been asked from a customer, and is there anything specific that they're looking for as far as vegetables? I'm liking the Pickle Brothers story. I'm assuming you say they tried canning cantaloupe. I'm not sure, but it exploded. Oh, goodness. Linda, methods here in the discussion, most can and freeze. A little experience drying. Yes. Okay, so no, honestly, I've not heard of canned cantaloupe. I know we do have recommendations for freezing melons, making them like in the melon balls and freezing them, but no, I do not have recommendations for canning of cantaloupe. Also, I should say we do have some pickling recipes for like pickling watermelon rinds, that type of thing. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for taking time again to discuss those and for sharing in the chat box. Yes, don't know if they were pressure canned or water bath. Cantaloupe should be a high enough acid food that should have been safe enough to water bath can, but something went wrong there if it exploded. You may feel very much like the family in the slide by early September. Okay, now what else can we do with tomatoes? Tomatoes are fun to preserve. In the United States, canned tomatoes are the most widely home canned product, and tomatoes preserve well by many other methods, such as freezing, drying, pickling, or making into jam. And tomatoes provide a great opportunity for you to market in quantity to home preservers, and particularly to salsa makers, if you can market in quantity to those folks that are looking to make many quarts and pints of salsa. Even think about marketing your green tomatoes towards the end of the season. One of our co-workers here this past fall brought in really tasty pickled green tomatoes, which I had not had before, and also a green tomato salsa that she had made. And of course, we know that green tomatoes can be part of relishes, chow-chows. So not only just the red tomatoes to market, but the green tomatoes too. Okay, looking at the chat box, Linda said some experience here with steam juicing. Yes, I've heard good things about that. Drying romas. Oh yeah, tomatillos and salsa verde. Green tomato jelly. Okay, I have not had green tomato jelly. Interesting. So yes, we kind of forget about, or don't think about how we can best make use of green tomatoes. So it's great to see that we're learning more ways to do that. We looked at the pH chart a few slides back, but now as we focus on tomatoes, are they high acid or low acid? There are many factors that determine the acid level of tomatoes. To put tomatoes in context in pH, let's take a review of where they're at. And as we look here, I know it's difficult to read, but here are tomatoes on a pH chart. Again, the fruits on the top of this chart are strong acid or known as a low pH, and they're safely preserved by water bath processing. The vegetables and meat on the bottom of the chart are low acid or high pH. A pH above 4.6 or a low acid food, anywhere going down here, is where Clostridium botulinum or botulism is able to grow and produce toxin. If you want to preserve vegetables by canning any of these foods down here, you must pressure can them. A pH of 4.6 is the dividing line between low and high pH. The maroon arrow is pointing to tomatoes. They are about in the middle of, or very near the 4.6 dividing line. With the development of lower acid tomatoes, the concern becomes ensuring safe water bath processed home canned tomatoes and tomato products. Do know that the pH of fruits and vegetables is only a factor when canning. It is not a factor in the safe freezing or drying of fruits and vegetables. If I asked you to locate lemon juice and vinegar, we would see that they're up here. And with that, we can see that on the pH chart, and as we know, that they are very high in acid. So if you look at where tomatoes are, and you add lemon juice to them, you can see how they would become stronger in acid and then safe to water bath can. A newer recommendation is the addition of acid, either lemon juice, vinegar, or citric acid to ensure that canned tomatoes have enough acid to safely water bath can. When canning tomatoes, it is recommended that you add 1 tablespoon of bottled lemon juice per pint or 2 tablespoons per quart to the jar, either as your first step in filling the jar or fill the jar with the tomatoes and then add the lemon juice before placing the lid on the jar. The same process but different amounts for citric acid and vinegar. Lemon juice is preferred for its taste and that it is economical to purchase. Home food preservers have not been as pleased with the addition of vinegar as it tends to produce an undesirable flavor in the tomato product. And as you can see from the chart, more is added, more quantity, the 2 tablespoons and 4 tablespoons of vinegar per quart and pint versus that which is lemon juice. Again, this is only when you're canning tomatoes. You do not need to worry about this when you're freezing tomatoes. Back to the principles of boiling water canning, the handout that's available to you on the website. On that piece of information, the tomato acidification recommendations are listed on that page. Okay, as we look at the chat box, can you get citric acid at the grocery store? Go back to it. Yes, you should be able to get this. Where'd my green guy go? There. You should be able to get the citric acid at a grocery store in the food preservation section. I know they have it, for example, at the Mills Fleet Farms and those kinds of places. They have it's a quite small container and goes a long ways. You only need like a 1/4 teaspoon or so for, say, a pint of tomatoes. Donna asking, can you substitute lime juice? Yes, you can use lime juice in the same quantity as the same quantity as bottled lemon juice. This would be an equivalent. You could use lime juice or lemon juice here. And some people really like that flavor, particularly when I talk about salsa, they prefer putting lime juice in versus lemon juice. I think it's more expensive for, again, going back here, I have some of the main brands here, but let's go right here. You do not have to have any particular brand of lemon juice, but you do need to have a bottled lemon juice, and it can be an economical brand. Okay, good question, David. What about tomato juice? Does it need lemon juice too? Yes. Yes, it needs to have the same recommendation right here. This recommendation, I'm going to focus right here again on the bottled lemon juice because most people prefer it. It's economical and easy to use. This recommendation is for canned stewed tomatoes, tomato juices, tomato sauces. Let's see, what else might you be making? Ketchup, barbecue sauce, you probably have a vinegar in it, so that takes care of it. I will say at this point, though, this is not the exact recommendation for salsa, and so this does not apply to salsa. And again, this does not apply to frozen product. For example, if David was making tomato juice that he was going to freeze, and it does freeze well, would not need to add lemon juice. And again, you might want to add lime juice. Excuse me, Linda is asking, if you are adding acids to foods, what pH should one aim for? Okay, let's go back to the chart. We have 4.6 here. We want our pH to safely water bath process. We want our pH to be lower than 4.6. So when it comes to products that you might be marketing to the public, we like to see them 3.8, 3.6, 3.3 in this area. And you can see like dill pickles, it says 3.2 to 3.7 right here. And so that's where we'd like to see them. That's a recommendation for them. Okay. Marcia is asking, so frozen lemon juice is not okay. Yes, it should be fine. Not lemonade or lemonade concentrate or something like that. We're talking about real lemon juice. The reason I say bottled lemon juice is the recommendation is that we do not squeeze our own lemons, and that doesn't tend to be something that we do in Minnesota. But for example, if we lived in California or Florida, maybe we would consider squeezing our own lemons. And the point to that being that we would not know the acid level perhaps of our own homegrown lemons. But yes, bottled lemon juice or frozen real lemon juice would work. Good questions. Thank you. Anything else on the asset? Like I said, this is a relatively new recommendation. The last few years, again, because new tomatoes are being developed that are lower in acid, and they're being developed for that purpose, for taste and flavor and things. And so when it comes to preserving them, I have to say right now, most of the varieties, and we can look up some of the varieties, but last when I checked, most of the varieties that were developed that are lower acid are being used in commercial preservation, and they were not varieties that I was familiar with from our local seed catalogs or garden center. With the addition of acid to tomatoes and tomato products, they can then be safely processed in a water bath canner. All tomatoes are not created equal. Don't can tomatoes that are overripe, decayed, or damaged, exposed to frost or harvested from frost-killed vines, ripened indoors. And this really comes into play when folks are trying to save every last tomato at frost time. We run into some of these situations. And all of these points, these three main points here, they result in a reduced acid level in the tomato, making them unsafe to can. Okay, a couple questions. Does the size of pieces of fruit or veggies matter? No, not really. If you're canning fruit or vegetables, for example, we can can a half a pear, or we can can slices of pears. We can can whole green beans. We can chopped green beans. What does matter versus the size of the fruit or the veggies is the thickness or density. For example, again, as I mentioned about pumpkin or squash, where we used to can the mashed pumpkin or squash, and we no longer do that. So what does matter is that we have solids with a balance of liquid, regardless of the size of the solids. For example, when adding acid, does it need to permeate the food? It does in pickling, and there's guidelines I won't get into tonight about when you should pH certain pickled products to make sure that you've actually turned the cucumber into a pickle, so you've got an equilibrium pH that you're reading. So it does in pickling. In tomatoes, because they're so fluid, again, you can put the lemon juice in the jar and then add the tomatoes on top, or you can put the tomatoes in the jar and put the lemon juice, tablespoon 2 or so on top. You don't have to stir it in or anything like that. Yes and no. Okay. How can you safely ripen indoors? Elaborate. Ripening. Okay, let's go back to this one. Okay. You can ripen tomatoes indoors, and you can eat them. I think we had some this last year into November, which is the first time we ever had that happen at our house, but it was kind of fun, of course, and then they're not the best quality. I would recommend that you speak to one of the extension horticulturists or one of the master gardeners for that question, because they have some great tips. Either I've heard wrapping in newspaper, spreading them out, so they don't touch, having them in a dark place. There's lots of little guidelines to how you can ripen tomatoes. Ripening them is not a safety issue, it's a quality issue, but any kind of indoor ripened tomato you do not want to can, because that becomes a safety issue, because they do have a lower acid level as a result of ripening off the vine in the house. So you can eat those tomatoes safely. You could freeze those tomatoes. You could actually, if you thought they were good quality, you could actually, where was I going with it? Freeze them, make salsa out of them, that kind of thing. You're going to freeze. Okay, so I don't know if that answers, but yeah, there's great tips for how to ripen tomatoes indoors, and sometimes it works out really well. Okay, why the need for lemon juice in pressure canning? I have to say that's a good question that I honestly don't know the answer to, but I have to give you that recommendation, because that's the recommendation from USDA from the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And I know that has been questioned. So I don't know in time if we will see that change, because we are taking those tomatoes to 240 or 250 degrees thinking, isn't that enough? Do we also need the lemon juice? So yes, but right now the recommendation is to add lemon juice to tomatoes, whether we water bath can them or pressure can them. Okay, what about canning stored tomatoes that are ripened chemically? Yeah, I would question that. I'd have to do more research on that, but I'm going to discourage you from that. Because again, that's if you will, an artificial ripening process, and I would assume that it would affect the acid level, but I don't know that for sure. Okay, Donna's saying cook them down for sauce. Yeah, and I would recommend freezing them, again, rather than canning them. No, Robert says, so just ripen near a good window. Nope, I'm not going to give you that recommendation, because I actually believe they're not supposed to be in the sunlight. So again, like I said, a master gardener, or maybe some of the folks who are on tonight, if you have any suggestions for Robert. Okay, Linda, if they're cooked in salsa or sauce, still not acidic enough? No, because acid, we're talking about the base acid level of the tomato. And as we look at the slide in front of us, these factors do reduce the acid level in the tomato. And if we go back, let's just go back one slide here go back here. Okay, when we go back to this slide, here's our 4.6 right here, which determines anything above this can safely be water bathed. Anything below it needs to be pressure canned to be safe. And we look, and here are tomatoes, okay? And this says, I'm having a hard time reading it, it says vine ripened tomatoes, okay? So they now specify that this is vine ripened, this is not ripened indoors, this is not after the frost, etc. Okay? Okay, a recommendation to dry tomatoes, yes. Yes, you could dry any of these tomatoes that we're talking about. Okay, so they are borderline to begin with, can't afford any acid loss. Thank you, yes. There even are some varieties, like I said, used primarily in the commercial canning market that are coming in right in here. 4.8, 4.9, and so they are below the line as they're being developed to be that. Okay, good discussion on tomatoes. As I said, tomatoes are so popular. This is one of the newer recommendations for the processing of tomatoes. And, okay, I've heard today. I'll have to come back to this question, Robert. We'll try to make note to save this, and maybe we can talk more about this in the end. Okay, anytime we're adding meat, again, meat is a low acid food, very low acid that needs up to, okay, so I've heard that take most time for a recipe and then add 5 minutes to the processing. Oh, if you're creating your own? No, not so much when we're talking about low acid foods. Okay, Debbie, here she goes. To ripen green tomatoes, put in a single layer in a box with a ripe apple and cover with newspaper. The apple gives off a gas that helps ripen. Yep, that's one of those suggestions that I said there's a number of ways to do it. That sounds like a very reasonable way, because it's often they're covered. Again, they're not in the direct sunlight. Donna, any information on lactofermentation? Lately I'm seeing some reference to this. No, not going to cover this tonight, and we have very limited information from the university on that. Kind of like the making of sauerkraut and kimchi and other processing. In teaching peddling your pickle classes across the state, I have run into some folks that are very knowledgeable on this process and do lacto-ferment a number of their vegetables. Yes, kimchi, thank you, like kimchi, sauerkraut. They do things with beets, carrots, other vegetables too that they do process that way, but no, we're not going to be covering. But that's kind of related to our next topic here. But just want to finish a couple of things here on tomatoes. We talked about the boiling water bath canner. tomatoes. I'll get through this slide again. Okay, want to talk about salsa as our one of our next to last things on tomatoes. And with salsa, we know that salsa is very popular, and everyone has the best recipe for salsa. And here may be the food safety concern, the creativity that our people might be using in creating their recipe. Do use a recommended salsa recipe. Tomatoes, as we are talking about, are for the most part high acid, but things that you may be adding, like onions and peppers, and black beans and corn that we see now, black bean corn salsas, are low in acid. Look how extremely low acid corn is. Like I talked about before, one of the challenges with preserving corn by canning. Salsa recipes are a balance of the high acid foods and the low acid foods. And that balance is very important. And to help us with that balance, with the onions, the peppers, the tomatoes, is our friends lemon juice up here, or vinegar to our salsa recipes. Or, as you mentioned before, lime juice also fits in here. Salsas should be water bath processed, and to let you know that at this time there are no recommendations to pressure can salsa. There is research being done. Again, the University of Wisconsin is taking a look at that we do not have any times or pressures for processing salsa in a pressure canner. If you want to be really creative with a salsa and you want to add black beans or corn or many more peppers, onions, etc. to your salsa, plan to freeze it. That way you can be most creative. You can, talk about creating your own recipes, you can do it that way, create your own recipe. And if you don't choose to add lemon juice or vinegar to a salsa recipe, plan to freeze it. And that works out really quite well. If you want to make a salsa hotter, you want, say the recipe calls for 1 cup of green bell peppers and half a cup of jalapeno peppers, and you want it hotter than that. Well, you can take that 1.5 cup amount in that recipe. You can make that all jalapenos if you choose. You also can make it all habaneros or Thai chilies or whatever you like. But in the recipe, do not increase the amount, but you can substitute the peppers. One of the handouts that I do have up online is called Recommended Salsa Resources. Encourage you to go there if that's of interest to you, the making of salsa. And also just another tip that you're welcome to print, of course, any of these resources that we're providing for you this evening. And the Recommended Salsa Resources, if you would like to print that and share that with any of your customers, any of the folks that come buy tomatoes from you at the farmer's market, or want to order ahead and pick up a bushel of tomatoes from you to make salsa, include that handout for them. I think they'll find that very helpful, because there's lots of information and recipes on there, lots of links that they can go to. Okay, taking a look, any special recommendations or new innovations for kimchi? No, Robert, I don't know of anything with that. I myself am not a kimchi maker. I do make homemade sauerkraut, and I always make it the same, and I have my preferences on how to do that. Just for example, I prefer late cabbage versus early cabbage for making sauerkraut. I have my days, my temperature, etc. But I'm sorry, I don't know kimchi recommendations. Donna, I made a roasted salsa verde recipe and canned it. It spoiled due to not enough lime. The recipe was made for fresh consumption. Don't waste your good produce. Yeah, thanks, Donna, for that recommendation. You will find, again, like I said, on the internet, lots and lots of information on home food preservation. And, for example, I was searching around looking for a pickled beet recipe at one time, and all the beet recipes that I ran across just in a quick search were for refrigeration. Nothing about processing them or canning them. And so Donna's making a point here that she made a recipe that was made for fresh consumption, but not meant to be processed. Did not have enough acid in it to do that, and the product spoiled. I'll write down sauerkraut, and when we're done this evening, if we have a few minutes, I will just share with you some of my sauerkraut tips and my thoughts on it. I made a note of that. It's right here. Okay. Asked you this question earlier, and you responded, some of you, that yes, can you freeze tomatoes? You certainly can. Person I talked to once, she wanted to know if you could freeze tomatoes, and she was so happy to, when I said yes, that, you certainly can freeze tomatoes. And she was going to be looking forward to enjoying a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich in the winter. Well, tomatoes do freeze well, but they don't freeze that well. Not good enough, as you know, to have a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich out of them in the winter. But it really is a time saver. You can process them later in soups, stews, chilies, use them that way, or actually process them later into another product. You can freeze them about any way you want. At the end of the season, mid-September or prior to the frost, when you're short of time, it's tempting to put whole tomatoes in the freezer, and you actually can do that, except that it does take a lot of freezer space. But if you're going to get to them later, you simply can wash them, bag them up, and put them in the freezer. But a recommended way is to wash them, blanch them in hot water for a minute or two, submerge them into cold water to remove the peel from them, the skin, and then proceed if you want them pureed or you want them quartered or halved, chopped, however that you would like them. Put them in a freezer bag or freezer container and freeze them. Anita, can you freeze them fresh, then can them later? Yes, you can, but realize you will lose some quality in that process, and of course you will lose most of your vitamin C because you're like double processing them. But yes, and then canning them later, I would suggest that you're canning them later as spaghetti sauce or tomato sauce, something where you've been cooking them down, making them into another product, and then freezing them. Dried tomatoes. We hear about sun-dried tomatoes packed in oil. Well, maybe not in the sun in Minnesota, but we certainly can dry tomatoes. They add excellent flavor to soup, stew, pasta, salad, and pizza. Recommend that if you would like to dry tomatoes, that you choose a paste variety of tomato, Aroma, Viva Italian, or Amish paste. Dry them in a food dehydrator, and then for storage, store them in a cool, dry, dark place. They will discolor, darken as such with time. That's just kind of a factor, but that's not a safety issue. It's not even a quality issue. It's just a visual issue. Drying tomatoes is just fun, easy to do. It results in a tasty, useful product. And if you haven't dried tomatoes, I encourage you to give it a try. They're just a great taste this time of year. Have a couple jars at home yet and been adding them into, again, pasta dishes, crunching them up on salad, putting them in soup, and they've just... when you're kind of wishing that it was tomato season in Minnesota, at least your dried tomatoes help you get through that a little bit because they taste so good. Okay, question here on tomatoes. Would that reduce the acid, the piece of freezing them fresh and then canning them later? I don't believe that would reduce the acid, but for sure, of course, we do want to add the lemon juice in the canned product. How long do dried tomatoes last? A few months. Yeah, mine start turning a little bit darker, 6-8 months. I keep them in a cool, dry place, in a tight jar. But some people actually freeze them. They dry them, and then to have them extend longer, they put them in a tight container into the freezer. But I'll just about be out when it's time to put new tomatoes into the garden. So, yeah, we could probably, dried well, dried foods last a really long time, but for quality and for, like I said, the looks of them, I would say about a year that you could have them like that. Okay, any other questions on preserving tomatoes and salsa? You brought up lots of great points about the acid and processing them. Okay, Anita says she does put dried tomatoes in the freezer. They take up very little room. Anita, can you just tell us a little bit about what they're like when you take them out? I myself have not frozen my dried tomatoes. Could you just say how you use them? Okay, same things that we had on our slide, a variety of things. Good that they come out the same. Good to know. That certainly would extend their life. Good question from Robert. How long should you keep, use canned products, frozen, etc.? On home canned foods, we say 1 year from canning to use them up within that year. And that has to do with using our product up before we can our new product this year and put it on the shelf. It's kind of an inventory rotation product. But using it up for best quality of nutrition, of the quality of the product, etc. We do know that a lot of home canned products will go 2 to 3 years. And so we will lean on use everything within 3 years, but the standard recommendation is 1 year because, again, like I said, you're putting new product on. Back to my sauerkraut, I only make sauerkraut every other year just because of the work and the time, etc. And it's just my husband and I, we don't need to make it every year, and for what we give away to friends and family, so I keep it 2 years and rotate it out. Frozen product, you want to make sure that your freezer's at the correct temperature, that you are in a good freezer bag or freezer container because you know freezer burn is the enemy. And again, use within 1 year. We do know, of course, that some foods don't freeze as well that long. Some meats, for example, sausage, tends to get rancid prior to 1 year in the freezer. But as far as fruits and vegetables, we say 1 year. I have some stew recipes that add dried tomatoes to a tomato sauce-based stew. Excellent flavor. Okay, thank you for that suggestion. Yeah, again, like I said, if you hadn't had the opportunity to dry a variety of paste tomatoes, and of course you can dry other tomatoes too, it's just that there's more liquid in them to dry. Do give that a try. It's just a nice, tasty addition to your diet. Okay, I'd like to move on to pickling, and as we know, pickling is not just for cucumbers anymore. Farmers market vendors tell me that pickled asparagus, beets, cucumbers, green beans, carrots, and relish are the top sellers at the farmers market. Vegetables from asparagus to zucchini can be home preserved by pickling. The key is to select your recipe from an approved source that is specifically designed for the vegetable that you are pickling. Follow the directions carefully for a safe, high-quality product. Plan to pickle fresh produce within 24 hours of harvesting. And this is very important for a quality, crisp pickle product, especially for cucumbers. So if you are selling cucumbers or other vegetables in quantity for home preservers to pickle, my question to you is, can you get them to them quickly after pickling? Be sure to use quality ingredients when pickling. 5% acidic vinegar, pickling or canning salt, and fresh spices. Just want to talk about water briefly. Use the water that works for you. People will travel miles to get the right water to make the quality of pickle that they think they need that water for that pickle, and they probably do because it's worked for them for many years. Recommendations will tell us to use a softened water, and that's kind of a misleading term because it's not soft water. It's just water that's not as hard, as high a mineral content as hard water, so it gets a bit confusing in the recommendations. So that's why my recommendation to you is to use the water that works for you. Some people feel they need well water, they can't use their city water, etc. But through trial and error and experience, people do find the water that works for them. Today's pickle product jars are sealed with a 2-piece ring and lid, as long gone are the zinc lids and rubber rings of the past. And also in the past, pickle recipes called for the addition of alum or lime to help produce a crisp pickle. These firming agents are no longer needed, as a crisp cucumber pickle can be achieved by using an up-to-date recipe, quality ingredients, removing the blossom end on the cucumber, and water bath processing. Okay, pickling questions. I see some things in the chat box. Let's take a look here. Are there any peppers with high enough acid to negate lemon juice? Let me just take a look at my chart that I have right in front of me here. I will say at this point, no, that I do not know of any high acid pepper. They all are low acid at this point. They would not, you would not be adding probably lemon juice to peppers. If you were going to pickle peppers, it would be a vinegar recipe that you would need to pickle your peppers in. What about lemon pickles? I don't know about lemon pickles. If you can tell me a little more about that. I assume, is that like a rind type thing? Is it kind of like we're talking about watermelon pickles? If you could fill me in on that, well, I'll check back on that. Is sea salt okay? Yes, I believe it is. The concern when we're talking about salt in pickling, the reason we say canning or pickling salt is because it does not contain iodine. And iodine is something that we want in our salt for eating. We need it in this area, it prevents goiters, although back nutrition information that you used to learn about. But in pickling, iodine can cause a cloudy brine. And we want a clear brine on our pickled product. And so if the iodine causes a cloudy brine, then we don't know if it's a spoilage problem or if it's an iodine problem in the brine. So canning or pickling salt without iodine. And I'm assuming that sea salt does not have iodine, but also saw something on the TV the other day that a sea salt now did come out with iodine. So you'd want to make sure that your sea salt did not contain iodine, again, to not cloud the brine of your pickled product. Yes, it is safe to pickle garlic. Have had some garlic growers in my Peddling Your Pickle Safely classes, and they are doing just that. That's one of the products that they do produce from the variety of garlics that they do grow. And so, yes, make sure to find a recipe for that so you have the right amount of vinegar to product, etc. Yes. I would think that lemon pickles are low acid. Oh, talking about the acid. Okay, yes. Isn't there a Middle Eastern dish, somebody maybe could help me out here, where they do they pickle whole lemons, or they do something with I'm sorry, I'm not real familiar with it, but I know I've run across it at one of the food shows. Yes, a lemon pickle certainly would be a low acid product that would be safe to process. I just wasn't quite understanding what it might look like or the form that it might be in. Okay, using lemon juice or citric acid. We don't like to use vinegar because it is just the juice from rotten veggies. Okay. Yeah, like I said, in pickling, you don't use vinegar? Interesting. Okay, good. Are there any oil canned recipes? You see them in stores. How does that work? Yeah, like I mentioned before, sun-dried tomatoes packed in oil. We do not recommend that you make that at home because of the risk of botulism. I will say right now, there are no oil canned recipes that are safe for the home food preserver, and that commercial processing has their methods that are proved to be able to do that. So Easy Preserve from the National Food Preservation Center. The only thing I've seen over the years is a marinated 3-bean salad recipe that they have, and it had a little bit of vegetable oil in it, and then they had everything balanced so that you could safely process that. But no, we do not recommend that you make garlic in oil at home, or that you make dried tomatoes in oil at home, or dried or peppers in oil, because you're creating an anaerobic environment with a low acid food, and just not a safe thing, a botulism risk. As we're talking about canning, I just want to remind you that canning on a smooth or glass top electric stove can be a challenge. And I wanted to include this in on our canning section because this may be an issue for your customers, something that they haven't thought about or they don't know about. And this is especially true for inexperienced home canners, new canners who are just getting started learning how to preserve food by canning and not realizing that their stove may not accommodate them in doing this. The traditional blue water bath canner does not work well on a smooth top stove because it has ridges in the bottom. But to water bath process on a smooth top or glass top stove, you can use any flat bottom kettle that's tall enough to allow for 1 inch of water over the jars. A pressure canner is too heavy for too long, and another problem with canning on these stoves is that they power surge, which can result in inconsistent heating and difficulty in maintaining a consistent pressure with your pressure canner. If you want to can on this type of stove, check with the manufacturer of your stove. Most do not recommend canning on these stoves and will not stand behind them, as you may crack the glass top. So something that to think about. Question there from Annie, can you pressure can on them? And I'm saying no. Again, check with your manufacturer. I personally purchased one about 3 years ago, and it took me forever to make up my mind. And none of the salespeople and stuff would recommend or stand behind me canning on it. And one of the things, I could understand it. I have an older canner that's very heavy. I like pressure canning chicken in quarts, which was very heavy. It processes for 90 minutes, which is very long to have that weight, that heat on that stove for that long. It just doesn't work well. So something to think about. Okay, answering a few questions in the chat box. Are cucumber refrigerator pickles safe? It has a vinegar base. Yes, they are. Refrigerator pickles are a good thing. As far the recipes, usually always include sufficient amount of vinegar. You didn't have to process them. They're refrigerated. The refrigeration temperature also helps to preserve and keep them safe and quality. So, yep, refrigerator pickles are a good thing. Can you freeze such as tomato with oil? You could safely. It's not a botulism risk to freeze a low acid or acid food even with oil. But one thing you're going to find, it won't last real long in the freezer for quality. Oil tends to go rancid in not a very long period of time in the freezer. So with oil going rancid, I don't think you'll like your product. We've been successful using the burner on the side of the gas grill. Okay, Donna, thanks for that. I know people have come up with other ways to can. Propane burners, on different kinds of portable stovetops. She's saying on the burner on the side of the gas grill. Okay, Linda Coleman stove. Yep. Smoker, outdoor fire, any benefits? Okay, not sure. I think Annie was talking about the question above. Okay. Okay, if that question can come back my way, I think I missed something there. Okay, Joanne, I have a Gen Air stove that has cartridge elements. I purchased a traditional 2 electric burner cartridge, then purchased a high power element to replace the larger burner, and this works for canning. Great suggestions. Yeah, there are ways to work this. Can you pressure can oil-based items like minced garlic? No. No, there's no, can you pressure can oil-based items like minced garlic? Just rereading that to myself. No, there are no recommendations. One, there's no recommendations for us to make minced garlic in oil. No recommendations, a safe recipe with the proper amount of oil to garlic to reduce the risk of botulism. No, we do not have that. And then we would never process anything like that with that much oil in. So that just is not something, excuse me, that we would make or process. And no, there's no pressure canning times for that. Okay, let's move on to freezing fruits and vegetables. Everything you grow could be frozen. Well, maybe not lettuce. You know, there's a few things that are questionable, of course, we know that don't freeze that well. Freezing is a great place for new food preservers to begin. It's a method that you can encourage with your customers, beginning perhaps someone's new at preserving, making freezer jams, freezing berries, juices, tomatoes, peppers, corn, and more. And freezing is also the preservation method, when done properly, that maintains the most nutrients in the food. There's lots of advantages to freezing: the good color and flavor and nutrition of the food, the fact that many foods can be frozen, it's quick and easy, and it's safe. We've been talking about this risk and food safety issues with pressure canning and pH and temperatures. When it comes to freezing, we don't have that. It's a very, very safe method. We don't have the risk of botulism when we freeze fruits and vegetables like we do with pressure canning concerns. Disadvantage of freezing, of course, is the texture of some of the foods change, and also the cost in buying and maintaining a freezer if you don't have one. Just briefly on freezing fruit, it's kind of my belief we should all freeze blueberries. Now, it's just one of my favorite things to do because they're so nutritious and they're so easy to freeze. Package and freeze. Now, you're thinking, doesn't she even wash them? Well, the recommendation is that we should not wash them before we freeze them because it can toughen the skin. We simply package and freeze them and then rinse them prior to use. Fruits can be frozen in many forms: whole, sliced, crushed, juice, but be sure to pick the best quality, mature, fresh fruit. And fruit can be frozen in a sugar pack, a syrup pack, or a plain dry pack. And you can base this on dietary needs. Fruit frozen with sugar or in syrup have better texture, color, and taste. But sugar is not needed for any kind of safety issue. Like I said, we don't have a safety issue. Sugar is part of the freezing process with fruit, simply as I said, for the texture, the color, and the taste of the fruit. Sugar substitutes may be used in a syrup or juice that you might be freezing a product in, or you can add them just before serving. But sugar substitutes, when used when freezing fruit, do not help retain color or texture like sugar. Okay, any questions on freezing fruit? Okay, somebody agrees with my blueberries there, I think. I like going to the farmer's market or a swap meet and I'll buy a case of blueberries and, go home and freeze them up. And frozen sweet corn, yum. Sweet corn freezes very well. When freezing vegetables, we want to prevent flavor and color changes that would take place in the freezer. To do this, we need to stop the enzymes in the vegetable, and we do that by blanching. Freezing is one of the easiest, most convenient methods of preserving vegetables. A common question from the home food preserver is, do I need to blanch vegetables before freezing? Well, blanching is the exposure of the vegetable to boiling water or steam for a brief period of time. The vegetables then rapidly cooled in ice water, and the cooling time should be the same as the blanching time. And blanching is essential for top quality frozen vegetables, as it inactivates the natural enzymes in the produce, which can cause the loss of color, flavor, and nutrients. And be sure to check the required blanching time for each vegetable. Do have a sheet for you online on the website titled Blanching Vegetables, and it does give information from artichokes to turnips, a number of vegetables for the blanching time, and then the process, be it blanching in water and steam, again the cold or ice water, and that a point to make note of is that the cooling time should be the same as the blanching time, and that vegetables do vary in their time, so do check that. Again, as I mentioned with the salsa resource sheet, just encourage you to take a look at the blanching vegetables sheet, and that too could be printed in something that you could hand out to customers if they're again buying from you in quantity and they plan to go home and freeze green beans or corn. hand them a blanching vegetable sheet to give them the information of how to do it properly so that they have a good quality product in their freezer. Okay, some questions here. How cold should the freezer be? I'm going to get to that one and ask you that trivia question. Peaches, we add ascorbic acid. We still get browning when frozen. I'm sorry to hear that. I think most of our recommendations, and perhaps you do this, David, are freezing of peaches in syrup. I don't think we have recommendations of simply treating peach pieces and putting them in the freezer. They are frozen, completely covered in a sugar water syrup or in a fruit juice or something where they're completely covered. So I'm not sure if you're doing that. Can you use honey instead of sugar? Yes, you can. You'd have to look. I guess you don't really need, it could be to taste, but yes, you can substitute honey for sugar. What about blanching in the microwave? That does come up sometimes, but we found out that that does not work very well. The reason is we don't really have any research recommendations for the time. But as you know, when we cook in a microwave, it tends to cook more so from the outside versus the center. It does not cook evenly, and it doesn't really save us time. If we're going to blanch for 1 minute in boiling water or blanch for 1 or 2 minutes in the microwave, and we vary on our quantities sometimes maybe, so it might take a little bit longer in the microwave. So no, microwave blanching isn't recommended to get a good quality frozen vegetable. Does the heat and steam need to get to the core of the pieces? No, it actually doesn't. It's more of a surface thing, because as I'm looking at my blanching vegetable sheet here, for example, let me take a look here. Kohlrabi cubes, 1 minute. Let's see, okra, odd things I'm picking here. Small pods, 3 minutes. No, it's not going to get totally to the core. One place, and I almost don't even want to go here, but it's freezing corn on the cob. That was popular a few years ago. We don't recommend it for a number of reasons, but that was really important to blanch so that you got almost to the cob and you got into the cob, so that you're inactivating the enzymes in the cob so that the corn on the cob would freeze to, hopefully best quality. But no, it doesn't really need to. So it's such a short time that it doesn't penetrate through the whole vegetable. For quality frozen vegetables and fruits, you want to be sure to choose quality freezer containers and freezer bags which are designated for freezing. Whipped topping bowls, margarine containers, milk cartons, and the like, which I'm showing here on the right of this slide, although they are food grade, are not quality freezer containers. They're just not airtight enough, and because of that, they leak air and they can cause freezer burn on our food. The drying of the product does occur, and then it becomes a quality issue. Freezer burn is not a safety issue, but it is a quality issue. So do select good freezer bags and freezer containers when putting produce in the freezer. We don't want to have the loss of product and time because of the container that we chose. Okay, here we go to the how cold should the freezer be. And this is a really important question. It seems like it's quite simple, but let's take a look. Should it be 41? Should it be 32? 0? Or 10 below? I know we had some correct answers earlier when we ran through this slide. Okay, we have a -10. I think it was Donna, or who got it right before we started? Someone else had it. Okay, we got some zeros. Okay. Okay, it is 0. And many people do not know this. So if this is something that you did not know, boy, you're not alone. I teach a number of food safety classes for restaurants and assisted living, schools, etc. A number of people don't know this, and so it should be 0. Of course, we know freezing is at 32, but our freezers should run at 0. But the folks who said -10, you're not necessarily wrong, because it is recommended that we lower our freezer as we add produce to it. We should never probably, put a whole lot of product in at once and expect it to freeze quickly. But to help us do that when we are freezing product, it is recommended to turn the freezer to -10 so that the product does freeze more quickly. And how might we know this? Well, we need to place a thermometer in our refrigerator and our freezer to ensure safe temperatures. And this is always very helpful if we ever have a power outage and you want to know what's taking place in your freezer and you want to know if your product is still good. Appliance thermometers are economical to purchase. They're available in the grocery store, hardware store, and kitchen specialty stores. So if you don't have one in your refrigerator or freezer, do purchase and put them in. Very helpful for us to know what's taking place there. Okay, some questions on freezing fruits and vegetables. I see some in the box. Why do my green beans rubbery after blanching and freezing? Isn't that frustrating? Yeah, it does happen, and we could do a little more research on that, Robert. I'm going to write that one down for later too, also with the sauerkraut question. Good quality frozen green beans sometimes vary by the variety of the green bean. And be sure that we have the right blanching time and cooling time, and that we let the beans drain well before we package and freeze them. Another piece of it is the type of water. We don't want to use really hard water, not too soft water, etc. There's a, just like we talked about pickling, there's a water component, there's a water piece as far as softness or hardness when we blanch vegetables. We don't see it very much other than in green beans is the main place that we see it. Okay, the 0 and 10 belows. How come broccoli becomes brittle after freezing and blanching? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know about brittle. If anyone has any thoughts on that one, that's a new one. Okay, why not colder? How cold is too cold? Oh, in the freezer? There is information out that shows us if our freezer is running at, say, 20, 25 degrees, the shelf life of our frozen food products declines substantially. When we get to 0, we get that 1 year length for our frozen fruits and vegetables. And then the -10 below, we do get a longer shelf life sometimes, and then it goes down a little bit. Yes, a freezer could run colder. One of the things is it's probably really not necessary to run it any lower. I don't know what we'd quite gain by that. And also it takes more energy to run it at a lower temperature, so it would cost us, more money to run our freezer, and so would not be as economical to do. Okay, moving on to marketing ideas. As we said, that the title of this program this evening is to help your customer preserve your produce. And with that, I'd like to ask you 2 questions. What ideas have you used to encourage customer preservation of vegetables and fruits? And what ideas are you thinking of trying? I would like you to spend some time jotting a few notes down about this. And if you would you please take a couple of minutes, if you're at a site, to share among your group. And I'd like to ask the site facilitators to facilitate the discussion on these 2 questions. And we'll take about 3 to 4 minutes to have you visit about these 2 questions. Thank you. Okay, if I could call you back, hope you had an opportunity to think about these questions as we're talking about marketing ideas, and if you'd be willing to share some of those in the chat box for others to see, and that we could take a few minutes to review. Again, like I said, we're talking about help your customer preserve your produce, but we're looking at it, of course, for you to increase sales of the produce that you do produce. Going to the chat box, I think I'm at Linda. Is there a simple pH strip to use to check pH? There are pH strips, but it is not recommended by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and other sources to test our acid or acidified foods. It is recommended that we do use the pH meter for that, and I do appreciate you putting up that link to NASCO on the webinar tonight, so thank you for doing that. Anita gives an instruction sheet and info to customers. Great. Donna, I want to develop recipes, including nutritional data promoting greens, since they seem to be the hardest thing for us to use in our diets. That's a really good idea, Donna. Greens, as we know, are so nutritious. We learned a lot about kale. My husband and I, the last few years, we didn't know all the possibilities of kale. And so we're enjoying that in a variety of ways. I think, of course, us in Minnesota maybe are not as green savvy as our neighbors to the far south who have grown up eating a variety of greens. Here's, okay, most are smaller quantity. Okay, also have books for them to look at and get ideas. Okay, available for them to view. It's a great idea. Tasting the product helps greatly, yes. And when it comes to tasting, make sure that you're following the guidelines for sampling from Minnesota Department of Ag, and that's available information for you too. I put a variety of products together to make a recipe. Great example, basil and garlic together for pesto, and it freezes great. Wonderful suggestion. Any method to reduce or eliminate lemon juices and vinegars or other additives when canning? Well, Robert, I guess it depends specifically on the product that you want to can, which food that you want to can. Again, like I said, for tomatoes, no, it's either lemon juice or vinegars or the citric acid, or else freezing. Again, freezing rather than canning. Fruits, the sugar solution in canning fruits is still going to give you a better quality canned fruit product. You could can in water, but I don't think you'd be as happy with that product. Okay. Well, thank you for taking some time to visit about those or think about them at home and to share those. I just wanted to share briefly with you from some of the classes that I have taught what people have suggested that they have been, or told us that they have been using and shared with us. So they're encouraging preservation to increase sales. One is to have a business card so that people can contact you for quantity purchases, and particularly that they can pre-order from you. Again, we talked about how important it is to get the cucumbers quickly in order to produce a crisp pickle, to get the sweet corn quickly in order to have a good quality frozen product. Green beans, any of the products that you want to pickle, you'd want to get them. So if they can pre-order from you and come to your site, your market, and pick up their bushel of cucumbers or tomatoes, etc. Some use a website. Others taking a look at brochures, recipe cards to promote the preservation of the product. Just to put a point in here for those of you who are familiar with the Minnesota Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, they've just developed new point of sale cards, and they're great. They show a picture, they're small, like a postcard, they give a recipe, they give preservation information, just really great. Posters and signs, and think about photos as far as the power of suggestion. Something simply as simple, I should say, as tomatoes freeze well, or tomatoes are tasty dried, something that maybe someone is not even aware of that they could do. So giving that information by your product. And having photos, like I said, you have resource books, pictures, photos of the home canned foods, frozen berries, jams, etc., so they can see the possibility of what they could do with the product. Many demos at the market. You mentioned sampling, blanching vegetables, freezing blueberries. Like I said, nothing could be simpler than that. You mentioned the pesto. Okay, Marcia mentioned that. Yeah, some of the suggestions have been to make a salsa kit. Put together tomatoes, onion, peppers, the recipe for 4 to 6 pints of salsa. Another market kit suggestion was the refrigerator pickle recipe, where you put the cukes, onions, peppers, dill, and a recipe for how to make refrigerator pickles. And another was raspberry jalapeno jam, where you have a recipe, the raspberries, jalapenos, etc., to make jam. And like Marcia, she put together basil and garlic for folks to make pesto, and letting them know that that product does freeze well. And any of these market kits or any of the brochures or recipe cards, make sure again that you're always using research-based recipes. And any others that are coming to mind. Okay, as we're coming to the close of Help Your Customers Preserve Your Produce, any questions that you would like to ask about any of the resources, freezing, canning, pickling, pressure canning, etc.? And then I have a few things to wrap up with you following this segment. Okay, well, I will proceed through here, and then I will come back for those who'd like to stay on. And I think I have sauerkraut to cover and a little bit about water for green beans. But again, as we started out taking a look at helping your customer preserve your produce, we looked at your role in customer food preservation. And again, to remind you that you have an understanding of the food safety risks in home food preservation, that you have an appreciation of the art of food preservation, but that you are knowledgeable in the science of the hows and whys of preservation, and you stress that with the folks that you are working with. Again, be aware of your role in responding to food preservation inquiries. Again, the science piece. If you don't know the answer, refer them to a recommended resource or have your resources with you. The mentioning of Anita said she has books for them to look at. Have a Ball Blue book. Have So Easy to Preserve available at the market with you so you can look it up. It's a great resource. And that leads us into what our third point was this evening, identifying sources of research-based food preservation information. And hopefully, knowing all this information can be enfolded with your encouraging customer food preservation and resulting in increased sales of your vegetables and fruit that you are producing. Just wanted to share with you our upcoming workshops. I had mentioned before we got started and made reference to throughout the program a little bit here tonight. Peddling Your Pickles Safely is where we learn about the pickle bill legislation. And again, working with pH meters and the importance there at Cabela's on April 5th and May 7th in St. Cloud, making and marketing jams and jellies. I say jellos. We're not making jello. Making and marketing jams and jellies, April 25th. At Cabela's and Rogers, and also with the Minnesota Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, we will be doing 2 food preservation webinars. You're welcome to join us on those. Lunch and Learns, they used to be, now we moved them up earlier in the morning. We're going to talk about jams and jellies for market, which would be a condensed version of the longer workshop, and we will be doing this type of program, a shorter version on June 6th of Help Your Customer Preserve Your Produce. Okay, just an opportunity. I'll leave that up for a little bit while I take a look at the chat box here. Okay, let's see. Oh, Linda, do you have recommendations for preserving fruits and wine? No, I don't, but that sounds darn good. I'm not familiar with that. I think, I've seen recipes for poaching pears and red wine, but I do not know about preserving fruits in wine. I'm not sure how that might work with the acid in the wine, if it would soften the fruit and cause it to somewhat break down. So that would be interesting. Excuse me, I'm just going to grab a drink of water. Okay. Is there any good way to keep carrots, parsnips, and beets fresh? Again, I'm going to recommend you to a county extension office, particularly to a master gardener or to a county that has a horticulturist, because if you're talking about root storage or cold storage, also check out the University of Minnesota Extension website. Excuse me. Oh, sorry, I had a little frog in my throat there at the end. But there's great information on the storage of carrots, parsnip, beets, onions, potatoes, the root storage, if you're thinking of that. good information on that, particularly the type of humidity they need, temperature they need, and who can be stored by who. It's kind of interesting. What are the regulations to sell jelly at a place like a health food store? You'd want to is visit with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and you would need a commercial food handler's license. You would need a food handler's license, and you would need a commercial kitchen. Okay. I just lost the questions. Okay. All right, I'll go down here further. They'll come back to me here. Okay. What are some of the better cabbages than Napa for kimchi sauerkraut? I don't know that there would be any better. I'm sure you could use a variety of cabbages, Savoy, Napa. I would think probably bok choy maybe is even used to make kimchi, but I'm not familiar with that. What about whiskey? Are you doing whiskey with fruits, Robert? Irish whiskey comes into play this Saturday with St. Patrick's Day, but I'm not sure about your question there. Okay. Just going to come to a conclusion here, and I think Linda wants to visit with you. I'd just like to say as we come to the end of our time this evening that I wish you a great market season, and do preserve safely if you are a preserver, and if you are selling in quantity to home food preservers, that you do promote safe home preservation. And it has been a pleasure to be with you this evening. Thank you for all your questions and interaction from when we started about 5:30 visiting with you. Great questions. And I will let, I think we only have a couple minutes left on our system here. I'll go quickly about sauerkraut. And the sauerkraut, just basically, like I said, I really like late cabbage. I make it in the crock rather than the jar. And let it go for about 18 to 21 days, and it's just great. In green beans, if I recommend that you check our website. We do have on the extension website a fact sheet on or information on water for preserving. Do take a look at that, because it does make a difference in pickling and in freezing, particularly of green beans.
Well, thank you, Deb. You're a marvelous presenter on using the webinar. I got feedback.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate joining us this evening. And thank you, Linda, for inviting me. It's been fun.